Parents, caregivers, let me know if this sounds anything like you. You went through the evaluation process and you finally got your kid a communication device. You heard all the hype and expected your child to start using it, but he or she's not even interested. They want nothing to do with this. But why? And what can you do from here? Well, for part 3 of this 3-part AAC series, we're going to address how to get the ball rolling so that your child will be encouraged to use their AAC device and continue to develop their speech. Speech-language pathologists Lydia and Mackay and Stacey Dover have so many insights and stories to share about this topic, so stay tuned. Welcome to the Autism Family Resource Podcast. We provide guidance and insights for parenting neurodivergent children. From Peer Arts Therapy, I'm your host, Brian Keene. All right, welcome back, everyone, to this 3-part series. Just as a refresher, we got Lydia Mackay and Stacey Dover as our guests, who are Phenix area speech-language pathologists who work with people who use AAC in schools and home settings. They provide evaluations and trainings for augmentative alternative communication devices through NAU's AAC evaluation and training program. Welcome back.
Thanks for having us, Brian.
Yeah, glad to be back.
All right. Before we jump into part 3, where we're focused on implementation, let's do a quick refresher. So in part 1, we talked about what is communication. So let's go ahead and go over a quick, brief summary of that.
Okay, sure. So we talked about what is communication, and basically it's not just verbal speech, right? We all communicate in different modalities all the time. Sometimes we write, sometimes we text, sometimes a frown, sometimes, body language, and all of those things fall under the umbrella of what we call total communication. We also talked about expressive language, which is your output, right? Whether it's verbal or writing or AAC is all considered verbal output. And we talked about receptive language, which is the ability for an individual to comprehend, to understand, to follow directions. And oftentimes with the individuals that we work with, they have a much, much higher receptive language or comprehension than their ability to speak. So there's a mismatch between how much they understand, which is usually much higher, than what they're able to express, which is much lower.
Gotcha. Thanks for updating us on that. And then how about part 2, where we talked a little bit more about getting a device in that evaluation process?
Just to recap that, we work for NAU, which has the Institute of Human Development AAC evaluation and training program. But there are ways through DDD. DDD now uses a managed care health organization. So that's one way, applying and filling out the questionnaire, start to finish. You may also use your private insurance if that's what you have. Stacey, you want to add anything else?
I would say that you can start probably best by reaching out. If your child already has a speech therapist, reach out to them for help and they can help you. So just like any other managed care benefit through the Department of Developmental Disabilities, AAC, you have to now pick a provider just like you would pick a dentist or pick a doctor. So your speech therapist should be able to help you with that if you don't know where to start. Or you can go to the Arizona Speech Language Hearing Association website. It's called arsha.org, and we'll put that link in the chat. And we have a list of all the providers that are contracted with the state to provide those evaluations, and you can choose one from there. Once you contact that company, they should be able to help you through the process with the paperwork and everything. But like Lydia said, if your child doesn't have DDD, you can try going through your commercial insurance, and you can also reach out to the school SLP because they ought to be able to sort of help you mitigate that.
All right, awesome. So we know what is a communication device. We know how to get one. Now that we have the device and it's time to implement it and use in our everyday lives, what do we do and how do we do it? How do we make it practical? Do we just throw it in front of our kids? Do we, what's realistic? So let's go ahead and jump into this implementation.
Yeah. And I think, Stacey, you could see what you think, but there are stages of talking about it. The first thing we do is we talk to the family about their routines. We don't just throw the device there. If I gave you a device and a friend of mine uses this all the time, and I put you down in a country where you don't speak the language, Throwing a device to you isn't going to help. You wouldn't know how to use it. You wouldn't know where your words are. You might not even know what word goes with what situation. So the family routine is very important, getting family social connections involved, and the tech aspect, of course. But we are looking for those social connections because what we try to do is help families teach confidence with using the device, that the device has value and is fun and meaningful. So those are some things we'll probably touch on today.
Yeah. And really, a lot of times when the family receives the device, it's almost like we have to take steps backwards before we can go forwards. So during last episode, we talked about, the feature matching process and how every device has different features. And we're trying to match those features to the needs of the client, right? And that's called the feature matching device. And so I always like to explain it's kind of like trying on shoes. You're looking for style, you're looking for size, you're looking for quality, maybe the length or the width or, fashion, your needs, running shoes, whatever. All of those are different features of shoes. With AAC, it's the same thing, right? So during the evaluation, we tried on AAC, just like we would try on shoes. We're looking for matches for all these different features that the individual needs. And then a lot of times what we do at NAU is we involve the families in the evaluation. And so we're trying to get them to use it. We're trying to set parents up so there's an expectation of this is what it's going to be like when your child gets the device. We coach them through the evaluation and get them involved in it so they have a little bit of understanding of it. And so when they receive the device, we kind of come back to that because sometimes families are overwhelmed from the start and they're like, wait, why did you give my child a device with 80 buttons? So I don't know, Lydia, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to talk about. I like to talk about what everybody calls real estate. So if I didn't do whether I did the evaluation or not, sometimes I come on board as the trainer. Someone else has evaluated and selected a device with the family. And often the first things parents will tell me is, these are too many buttons. It's overwhelming. Sometimes therapy providers and teachers will say the same thing. They'll say, this has too many choices. It's overwhelming. My child can't do this. Can we narrow it down? Can we just redo the whole thing and put 6 buttons? And we very gently talk them out of that. So we like real estate. So if we're looking at a communication system, we don't want the person to have to navigate several pages deep just to find the word that they want to say. We want something shallow. So there are systems where hopefully it's no more than 2 or 3 or 4 button pushes to get to the word that they're trying to say. So we want it to be shallow. And if we want it to be shallow, we want so many words up front on that first home page that the person is looking at. And so then we will, after we form a bond and get connected, and we'll talk about that some more, we do like to teach some of the techie side of what tools could we use to teach that word successfully. And so we would temporarily hide everything but a couple of words. And again, this is temporary. We don't let the device sit around that way, but we isolate. So visual, there's not a lot of interfering or distracting number of squares. So we try to get the family to have the end in mind, because what you do want is you want the person using the device to be able to find the word they want. And I'll tell you, after using those tools, after learning a couple of words that the child or the user wants to say, they're going to remember where it is. You'll be amazed. And so usually with the family, after I spend time listening to them, then we talk about the tech stuff and it will start to make sense.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point, Lydia. And really for families, I think when they see the device, because a lot of times it looks like a tablet, it looks like a glorified iPad or whatnot. Or you can have an eye gaze device, which is even bigger and can look really kind of intimidating. So for families, a lot of times their mindset is, it's the tech. I just need to put the tech in front of my child or my family member, and it's all about tech. And it's really not. It's really the evaluator and the trainer's job to show the family how to use the tech, help them understand why in the evaluation setting, your child was able to accomplish this. And while you might not be comfortable with it, you might not be comfortable with those 80 words, 120 words, as high, as different systems can go, your child is, right? And that child can do it with this support. And so step by step, we're going to take the training wheels off. And so that hide show feature that Lydia was talking about is one of our favorite training wheels. It's just a really great tool to focus on target vocabulary temporarily, and then again, give them back that full vocabulary and let them explore, right? So a lot of what we do with families is just teaching them strategies of how to use the device with the child, but we're always kind of reminding them, like, this is why we did this, right? And sometimes you will unfortunately run into well-meaning therapists, sometimes SLPs, sometimes even OTs, somebody who thinks they have some experience with AAC, and they will sort of question, well, like, why is this device set up this way, blah, blah, blah. And parents just need to understand there's a difference between an AAC SLP who does this full-time for a living and has thousands of hours of experience with complex individuals, complex minds, complex bodies, versus the average professional who has some experience and maybe some CEUs but doesn't specialize in it. Always go back to that training evaluation. Always reach out to your training agency if you still have questions, because we can always put in for more training hours if you need it to, kind of support the family more.
I love what you said about that high show feature, because it reminds me of when I met with you, Lydia, and you showed me that video. So I want to kind of paint a picture of kind of the video I saw where the boy was sitting on the therapist's lap and he just liked the bouncing action. So instead of having all the pictures on there, they had 2 pictures, and it made it so easy for him. It kind of makes you think of my OT framework, where he just had to push the button. And then he realized it caused something happened. He pressed that, and then a positive reward happened. And then he did it again, and he learned it so quickly. So I think what you guys are kind of saying is kind of you're teaching it with some preferred activities.
Right.
Branching off from that, I think a good transition or good way to go with this is sometimes with communication devices, we don't want to force the use of it, right?
Yes.
All the time. You want to talk about that, Lydia?
Yeah. So another favorite thing, just like Stacey was saying, sometimes when we come in the door and we're doing a family training, we have to back up and before, again, how to implement this in a way that the person using it has power and a voice and has the power to boss us around. That's what language is. It's the power to boss people around. At least that's how it starts. And there are different kinds of users. Some people might be more advanced users. Others might be emerging with their communication skills. So I meet many people who are emerging with communication. The first thing I do, and it sounds funny, I focus a lot on listening. I sit there and I talk to the family, and I use something called a routines-based intervention. It's all about routine. Families might tell you, we don't have a routine, it's chaos. And that's fine. There's usually even a chaotic routine. But I kind of take it a couple steps back and I say, and this is through research I had many years ago. There's a person named Robin McWilliam, and he came to a training back when I did early intervention in Oregon. And he threw everything I knew, on its side and said, why can't the OT be coaching communication? Why can't the PT? Why can't the parent? You're teaching people that don't have your degree or your level of specialty. And routines-based interview is something that he really came up with, and I scooped it. And so I'll interview them about who gets up first in your house, like very basic, and then I just listen. And I'm really good at talking. It's hard for me to be quiet. I write down everything they're telling me. Every routine, I want them to tell me stories. I don't want them to be linear. This is not a question and answer interview drill. This is tell me about who gets up first and then what. And they take me through their day if they're the primary caregiver. Then we'll talk about family, social supports, work, community. Sometimes it's church. Sometimes it's outside school, after school groups. What's in the person's world that we're trying to support? And then what I do, just like you were saying, to loop back to what you're saying, I listen to all those routines. And then I listen for, okay, let's pick a couple of routines where you might want so-and-so to tell you something, to say a word, and after we have a conversation, we start narrowing down a couple of things to do. And I say to parents, let's pick 1 or 2, because I know how this can go. This is a lot. Let's pick 1 or 2 that you could show, using the tools, the training wheels, like a finger key guard to make finger isolation work, using the hide and show, all these wonderful tools. But if we don't have that joy If we don't have what the person wants to say, you are not going to get that wonderful interaction. You aren't going to get it. They're going to feel like it's work and a drill. So if you don't lay the groundwork finding out who's this person, what do they love to do, what do they really want to avoid, and who's in their life, we can't really select good targets. So it really, and I say to parents, I say, you are the most important person here. I'm going to come and go. I'm only here for so long. You're going to be the person with the most confidence and control over this device with your person that you're supporting. So yeah, absolutely. We've had examples of people having devices used for drill, and it shows, because then the person finds it aversive because they think it's work.
Uh-huh.
So if they think it's work and the parents think it's work, it's not going to be as successful, because there's no joy. There's none of that delight at having said a word.
Yeah, and that joy component is really, really important because, and we talked about this a little bit in episode 1, that language doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? If we take a child, we know, if you take a child and you put them, in an orphanage in a third world country, like some of those stories we've heard on the news, what happens to those children when they find them? They're devoid of language many times because they haven't had a lot of interaction. And it's that give and take conversationally in the context of what's happening that builds those neuron connections and helps that individual realize, oh, that's the word, right? So, and just from a personal perspective, I can share that like this summer, I went to Mexico. It was a wonderful immersion opportunity for me. I'm very emergent in my Spanish. And I spent the weekend doing a lot of listening, right, to this foreign language I'm trying to pick apart. And what was interesting to me was some of the native speakers, they're so fast. And I know some Spanish, but my receptive language, my understanding and comprehension, much higher than my ability to speak it. I really didn't speak much the whole weekend. I did a lot of listening, right? So we have to remember that with our AAC users. Just like anyone who's developing language, even a typical infant, we're not going to expect a lot of language for them out of the first, even 2-3 years, right? It's a lot of listening and it's a lot of talking. And for our AAC users, we have to talk in their language, and we have to remember it's a visual language, right?
Yeah. And again, if any of your listeners have questions, a lot of this is, there's a lot of research supporting this as well. So if you're a baby, very, very, very young infants who go on to have neurotypical language development, who just develop spoken language very easily, they get to babble. They get to make sounds. They hear the sounds around them. And what happens is, let's say the baby is babbling, they can hear themselves producing the sound. There's sort of a feedback loop. When I move my mouth and tongue this way, my little articulators, I move my little baby muscles, I make noise, and I can hear myself making noise. And wow, that's amazing. And then I might say, dada. Now, I'm not saying dada. I'm playing. But if who comes up to the crib? Dada. Oh, dada. And the baby goes, oh, well, okay, I guess, all right, dada comes. And we shape that. And that gives words meaning, right? Words are arbitrary. Why does dada mean dada? I don't know. There's a process to it. And so when we have people who are still learning how to talk, or for whom speech is difficult, they don't often have the benefit of that feedback. So sometimes even with the device, let them babble, let them find the words, let them listen. It's not a bad thing. It's a very good thing. They need the feedback. And that moment of joy that we talked about. So if I'm the person using the device, I'm reaching out with my finger, I'm doing a motor action, I'm finding a location, there's a visual system, I know where it is on a grid, and I often memorize that grid. And why do I memorize it? Because the minute I hit that button, the word up, for example, or go comes out. And then what happens next? This really amazing thing, go or up or whatever it is I wanted. That cements things. So there's a common phrase called neurons that fire together, wire together. That is what strengthens that connection. And the joy moment that you referred to in the video I showed you, Brian, is that moment of joy there's actually science behind it, because I'm going to remember it. I'm going to fire, those neurons are going to fire and be strengthened in my hippocampus. And the next time I remember that word. I remember the location, the sound, and what happened. And that's how we start to make sense of words. And a lot of our people who use devices, if they are emerging with their communication skills, or if they're emerging with using the device, they need that.
Yeah. And that moment of joy is, we just can't like preach about it enough. Something else to think about is when you may look at like a school-based model, sometimes a clinic-based model. A lot of times they do tend to be more like skill and drill, because they have goals that someone's written and they're targeted and they've got to get through them. And so we got to practice this. And it just sort of happens that way. But that's not the way it really should be. So for AAC, especially with our emergent communicators, think about it like emergent language. When we have a child who has emergent language, what are we usually doing? We're following their lead, right? We are trying to have lots of conversational turns. We're following their lead means we're following their interests. So, I might want them to say this 10 times so I can, take data on it, but that's not what it's about. It's really about showing them the power of their language, giving them that moment of joy, recognizing, oh, they want to do this. Let's focus on this and give them the words that go with that context. Right. And then once we've done that a little bit, then maybe we, unhide some more vocabulary, open up some more real estate like Lydia was talking about, and then, give them access to everything and see if they can do it in that, in that fashion. So, but it's a lot of, we haven't really used the word modeling today, but modeling is one of the main strategies that we teach individuals, caregivers, or other therapists, is just to model on the device for the child or for the individual that needs AAC. Because it's that modeling is that input, right? That's that receptive language input. They can see it. It goes back to everything Lydia said. They can see it. They can hear that auditory signal. They get a beep when they push the button, and then they hear the word. So there's another auditory signal. And then it's that modeling for them allows that individual to really just get the gift, to get back and to sit back and relax and watch what's happening and take it all in, and have the gift of receptive language before that expressive language. So just like me, when I went to Mexico a few weekends ago, I was really stuck in that receptive language and just trying to understand. And so it was beneficial for me when other people were modeling, right? Maybe they would go a little slower. Maybe they would not say, a complete paragraph. They might say just a sentence, or they might break it down into a phrase or into just a single word so that I could, pick it up and then step up my own language.
And just to piggyback on what you're saying, Stacey, just you being less familiar with Spanish, the kids that are learning language and learning to speak and making sense of this signal that's coming in, just like Stacey says, when she first listens to Spanish, she's like, oh my gosh, it's so fast, because it's difficult to hear. Where does the word begin and end? The boundaries, the word segmentation.
I'm so glad
yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm so glad you said that, because I was about to say that, and then I was like, am I going to go too deep? So my experience in Mexico as a monolingual baby emerging Spanish speaker is that I had a really difficult time separating the words, individual words, from the speech stream, right? Because if it's all, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to my ear. And I'm trying to pick out words that I know, right? So what we know, especially about autism, is there is a lot of research related to autistic individuals and having difficulty picking out words from the speech stream if they're having trouble with their expressive language. And so that is a way that AAC can help. So there is a lot of research. I know we covered this in previous podcasts, but there's a lot of research that shows AAC or communication devices never hurts expressive language. It can only help it. And for a lot of our individuals that are on the spectrum, it helps them to segment those words from the speech stream. And it goes back to that feedback loop that Lydia was talking about, being able to see it, hear it, touch it, and then having all those neurons that fire together, wire together. And it goes back to that moment of joy. And really, when we think about our early emergent communicators, whether they're verbal or not, a lot of our AZIP, if you look at early intervention, it's a play-based model. Why? Because we're following that child's lead. That child is in charge, and we're not trying to artificially implement language on them. We're trying to give them language for what they want to do so that it can develop.
Right.
Awesome. So let me go ahead and play the parent and kind of re-summarize everything we've talked about. So we got our device. One of the first things that should happen is our speech therapist, and maybe even working with the OT, because we love routines and all that. But work with the therapist. What are the routines? Finding ways to implement the communication device into our routines and habits. Once we kind of figure that out, the speech therapist will kind of use tools to learn specific things and how to use the device. And meanwhile, as the parent, you can do a little bit of modeling, or quite a bit of modeling.
Quite a bit. Mm-hmm.
Whatever kind of works into their routine. And then also make it fun, right?
Yes.
Right.
We don't want to force it. We'd rather model. We don't want to force it. We want to make it fun, find the preferred activities that they like, and then just be patient, right? Because it takes time to build language, right?
Yes. And we ask parents to please be patient with us, because the reason why I ask them about routines, it's so easy to try to jump in with suggestions. It's really hard not to do that. And so I ask parents to be patient. The other thing is, you want that social connection. And I've also had parents tell me, and I explain to them the difference. They get confused sometimes and they say, wait a minute, I'm supposed to model. But then you're telling me to use hide and show and teach one word at a time. What do I do? And so we do kind of teach the difference between trying to teach that moment of initiation. And then that's why I say those hide and show tools should be temporary, and also use them if you need to. You can start with the system with all the vocabulary showing, because if the person can scan and find it, then don't use those tools, because they might not be needed. But if you notice they're having difficulty, or they keep pressing the same button over and over again because they've learned it before, and they're kind of needing a little more support, then you can turn on that tool. But I tell parents, model without expectation. The person using it doesn't have to touch that symbol. You're just showing them as an FYI, like you're suggesting, oh, you could tell me up. Ooh, you could say eat. You could say no. And you model that without expectation, and you have to kind of pause and give the person time. And I have met families that sometimes they hear the modeling message and they really, really want to support language so much that they feel a lot of pressure to model everything all the time. And again, that makes it not fun for the parent and sometimes not fun for the child, which is why we back up and say, hey, think about 1 or 2 times. I'd rather say, sprinkle those little things across your routine. Just sprinkle them. Don't make it pressure-filled for yourself. Just think of a time a day where you're having fun and playing, and you could model 1 word. And I usually just start with that. Because I know when I leave, if they're overwhelmed, they aren't going to do a thing.
Right.
I mean, because that's what I would do.
Yeah, it's really important that we meet families where they are. And that's why that interview and that, trying to figure out their routines is really important. It's such a great place to start. So I also interview families, try to figure out their routines. And I talk to them a lot about, this is a family project. Okay. I don't want you to think of it as like, this is, Juan's device, or this is Susie's device. This is a family project. Just like if you decide we're all going to learn Spanish, or we're all going to learn, Mandarin Chinese. And I explain to them that language is born in the context, right? So it happens in the moment, and it's that interaction between 2 people putting that meaningful word, right? And then I talk to them a lot about, where is the device going to live, right? So you want that device out. When Lydia was talking about babbling and having the device available so that individual can just, it looks like playing around with it. It looks like, she's just randomly hitting buttons. Yeah, she is. And she's learning. She's teaching herself. That's what's happening. And it's okay. It's okay for somebody to play around with the screen and hit what looks to you like random words. It's okay if they want to hit the same button 10 times in a row, because maybe they really like the sound of that word. That's okay too. Right. And so just letting families know that's all right. But I do ask families so there's a story that I always tell them. And this was a podcast that I used to follow, or she had a blog too back in the day. It was a woman who's now become an SLP. But at the time, she had a child that was born with a chromosomal abnormality. And she found her own way to AAC. It wasn't ever really a professional that identified that her child needed the AAC. She just kept searching and searching until she found the AAC community. So what they did was, when she finally got her AAC, she named it. Her mom bought her like a red and white polka dotted strap. That's a strap that she wanted to carry it around with. And she named it Minnie. So her device had a personality, right? And so they would say, well, we're going to the store, get Minnie. Come on, let's go, right? Where's Minnie? We're going to put Minnie on the table with us while we go, to McDonald's, all those sorts of things. So I've had several families, I tell that story often. I've had several families now name their devices, and they'll, kind of treat it like a member of the family, which is what I recommend, because you want to be connected to it all the time. You want to think of it almost as like an extension of your body when you're modeling on it. And you want that individual to see it as their voice, right? It's not supposed to be a workbox. So thinking about, where's the device going to live? Is it always going to be on the coffee table available for that child to interact with? When you're at dinner, is it going to be on the dinner table? Maybe it's on the kitchen island, but having it available. And again, that goes back to what Lydia said about finding out that family's routines and making it what's doable for them, and giving families permission that, like, it's okay to be overwhelmed. We're going to be with you, and your SLP is going to be with you. A lot of times Lydia and I will try and train the family's SLP or their OT, even the school SLP, so that, we can get some carryover. So, because there are a lot of like myths about AAC, but thinking about where it lives and having access to it all the time so they can babble on is really important too.
That's great. I love the naming your device. You're making it personal. We're very, immersion is the word that comes to my head. Make it very immersive, because we got to learn through immersion, right?
It's a family project. So I love Lydia's story that she's got families that just want to model all the time. A lot of times what I run into is families think they understand what modeling is, and I talk about it, I demonstrate it, I talk them through it, and I give them feedback. And then I come back 2 weeks later, and what are they doing? Push here, say this, do that. And they're quizzing, testing all the time. That is not modeling. Modeling is the adult doing the work. You're talking, and I try to tell my families, it should be without expectation for the child. Give them the gift of receptive language. Let them sit back and watch you, listen to you, and then pause sometimes to see if that child wants to interact with you, right? But give them that gift of receptive language. And I try to teach my families, it needs to be like 10-1. So you got to say 10 things on that device. And it could be the same word because you're playing the same activity, and then maybe pause, at least 5 to 10 times before you look to see if the child wants to interact or say something.
Yeah. And a word about modeling too, for what you're just piggybacking on what you're saying. Sometimes, and I tell parents this, and sometimes when I meet in my school setting, I might meet little kids who they haven't warmed up to me yet. They don't know who I am. They don't think I'm fun. They don't like me. Sometimes the device is just not fun for them for a while. And so sometimes I tell parents, it's okay to kind of do this a little backwards. So think about the device. It is their voice, as Stacey is saying. You're almost narrating a first person for them, okay? Because it's their voice. It's like that famous who's on first. Pronouns, people, you, me, that's very confusing sometimes for people who are beginning to use AAC. So I sometimes say, what do you think so-and-so is thinking about or might like to say? That's what you model. It could just be a little comment, little words. You're just narrating for them because they can't tell you yet what they're thinking. Everybody has thoughts. We all have thoughts. Whether we can speak them or not is another question. So back to the good modeling, narrate. The other thing that comes up for parents, teachers, and speech therapists, and I have done this too, which is why I'm saying this. Sometimes you can narrate what might be happening next. And I did this when I was first starting out, so I've learned a lot. Anyone can learn. You don't want to use the device in a way of a one-directional, I'm giving you directions. Okay, so sometimes I'll work with a teacher. I've had a little success with a person using the device, and the teacher says, the child wants to do something, the student wants to do something, and the teacher goes, no, not time. So they ask me, how can I say it's not time for X, Y, and Z activity? And I go, you can just say that, but the device is their voice. So I always encourage them, put yourself in that first person point of view. Narrate what they might be thinking.
Absolutely.
And you're going to know when you've hit on a great word, because then they look at you. They're like, ooh, you just said something I like. And you're going to see their heads turn. They're going to look at you, or they're going to look at the thing that you're doing. They might smile. And for a while, they might not show a lot of interest. Just keep trying. Model a couple words and pause, and you're going to see the reaction. And that's when you know. And so sometimes we model backwards. So my other point is, when I've worked with some students who the devices work, they don't want to do it. It's extra. And I say this to families. The families understand so well what the child wants. Okay.
Right. Mind reading. They're mind reading.
It's that you know so well what they want. So sometimes when you start to model with a device, or let's say you have an expectation that they use it, you can create a little bit of discord there, because they're like, wait, Mom, you know me, you love me, you always give me my drink. Why are you making me ask? That's too much work. I'm not going to do it. Forget it. They push the device away. They might cry. They might struggle. And so sometimes I say it's time to do things backwards. So let's say there's a therapy swing in the motor room. I've done this many times. Swing, 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 swing. Give them all the goodies. And then I have the device and I put the word go, go. Swing, 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 or the word fast, whatever you're trying to teach. They already have the goods. I model the word afterward. I met a child who was very upset with me. All I thought that the person had to do was touch the word play or touch the toy that they wanted. It was so aversive. It didn't go well. The next time I saw that same individual, I gave him the huge bin of toys, and then I touched play. Then I touched dinosaur. I already gave the goodies. So he just relaxed.
Right.
And he trusted me. He's like, this is not a mean person who's going to take everything away, because he thought I was being mean, because I was. So you learn the hard way. I didn't make a friend that day, and then I turned around and made a friend. Same thing with the swing. Give him the swing, go. Give him the swing, go. Then when they're comfortable with you, they're going to accept you modeling. So sometimes you have to give up the goodies first. And I know that sounds strange. A lot of people fight me on it. No, they have to ask. And I go, well, how's that going?
Yeah.
Might not be working.
I think that's such a great point, Lydia. God, you said so many awesome things. But this communication, it's not supposed to be transactional, right? If we would be exhausted, if every time we went to talk to someone else, it was a transaction and they were expecting something. So by just letting the child lead, finding out what they want, being in the moment with them on the swing or on the trampoline or whatever, and then layering in that modeling, you're reducing that child's demands and just showing them, like, that goes back to giving them the gift of receptive language and just letting them see, oh, she said go, and now we're going, right? Or she said swing, and now we're swinging. And let the adult do the work. That's what modeling is all about. I love it. And I love your tip about narrating too. I'm so glad you said that word, because that's one of my favorite things to tell parents, is just narrate from that first person what it is that's happening, right? Just give the play-by-play and no expectation for the child to communicate. Because when we put expectations on them and we want them to say it or say it this way, again, it goes back to mind reading, and that adult thinks that this is what that child wants to say, but mind reading doesn't work, right? So a lot of times children or individuals who use AAC will surprise, if they've got access to a device, they will surprise you and say, I don't remember what podcast I heard this on, but I heard it one time and I use it. They'll say a lightning word, and you're like, that word that like strikes you like lightning, and you're just like, oh, I didn't know he could say that. I didn't know. So yesterday I was working with an individual who is an adult, is an emergent AAC user. They've only had their eye gaze system for just a few weeks, and they use a phrase-based system. I added some new words. I unhid some words from their vocabulary so that they were showing. And they went right to it and said, I think she said no for the first time. And then I said, if you want out of that screen, you can hit the close button. It's right up here. And she hit close and went and navigated back to the home screen. What? And this is a brand new user. So that kind of stuff is amazing. It goes back to following their lead and then just letting them, have access.
That's awesome. You guys, I love the stories. I love the visuals. You guys did great. Thank you so much. There's just so much that I think they can work with.
Can you tell we love what we do? We have the best job in the world.
Yeah, we're pretty passionate.
Yes. We'll go ahead and end there unless you guys got any messages or some take-homes for parents before we finish off?
Well, I just think language is all about building those social connections, and that includes with the team that's supporting the person using the device. If you don't have that social connection, if you don't take the time to listen about what's important to the family and the person that they're supporting, I think that's the big takeaway. So parents should feel empowered that the person in charge of this is the person, using the device, of course, and the people at home. Like they should come away from the trainings with more confidence.
Right.
And if not, then maybe they need to give some feedback to me.
Yeah, 100% I agree. Our job is to empower families to take this hard thing and break it down so that they recognize this is just part of our daily routine. This is something that we can layer in all the time eventually, because communication happens all the time, right? And it happens with everyone. It doesn't happen once a week for 30 minutes with the speech therapist, because that language is never going to grow that way.
That's awesome, guys. Thank you again. I love that. Empowering families. That's what this podcast is all about. Unfortunately, this was the last part. We'll have to talk about something else again on a show because this was great.
We'd love to come back.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Lydia and Stacey did an amazing job of giving examples of how to really implement their communication device at home in a very authentic manner. I loved all the examples and stories like naming your device, following your child's lead, and even backwards modeling. As an OT, I'm a big advocate for routines and making things fun. Regardless of your age, if someone doesn't feel that an activity is fun or intrinsically motivating, we're less likely to want to do it unless there's a reward, but that's not the goal. So, fun and play is how we make learning fun, and incorporating learning into our routines makes learning feel more natural and organic, which is really how we learn best. So please reach out to me if you have any more follow-up questions or stories related to AAC and communication, because we'd love to do another episode to follow up on your request. The resources shared in this show are created to empower your family to thrive. I believe community leads to growth and learning, so let's connect. Follow me on the Pure Hearts Therapy social media pages where you can contact me directly for questions. The links to this show and my contact information are in the show notes. Just scroll down in your podcast player or simply visit pureheartstherapy.com for more information. Thanks for listening to the Autism Family Resource Podcast. Subscribe now for more resources to empower your family to thrive and live your best lives. See you next time.